Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Sometimes the best way to find a living is to stay right where you are and study with UAS online. Career-specific distance programs from the University of Alaska Southeast are the fastest way to increase your earning power.
We connect all over the world.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this 8th of November, Election Day, and we're going to provide you with a half-an-hour break from the rest of reality here and talk about something that really matters to day-to-day Alaskans here. And of course, this would be the weather. 800-472-0391 for your forecast on the phone. Weather.gov/Alaska. Your tallied forecast results there, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 year-round. And of course, if you have questions, if you're not sure where to find information that you've been looking for a while, send us an email, nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov. And remember, you're watching us live on ARCS, on KUAC 9.4 on the UAF TV channel there. You can also find that online there. There's a live stream there from their website. If you haven't checked that out before, you might find that useful. 360 North has us 7 days a week now at 7:30 p.m. and Alaska Public Media now 5 o'clock the following morning, but a little bit earlier in the evening you can find us on their YouTube channel, AKwx TV. An easy way to find that. You can also find that from your National Weather Service TV desk web pages there. On to what's going on there, or what's to come, let's say, for tomorrow night and into Thursday. We have two different watches for different ends of southeastern Alaska. Along the outer coast here, we're concerned about high winds, and that's going to be focusing on Craig, Metlakatla, places like Petersburg, Heidelberg. Looks like Sitka is probably going to be dealing with some of those stronger winds. Southeast winds 25 to 40 miles per hour, gusts up to 60 again for the southern interchannels and the outer coast, and then also for Sitka and point southward all the way down toward Port Alexander. That starts tomorrow night and picks up as we get into early Thursday morning. A little bit further north, where we're watching for the potential of winter weather, about 6 to 12 inches from Wednesday night and into Thursday once again. There will be a transition back to rain as we get into the afternoon there, but that does include areas along the Chilkat River Bridge and points westward there for the Haynesboro. So looking for that to start up Wednesday night and into Thursday morning for areas in northern sections of southeast. So we've got wind in the south and potential winter weather turning back to rain for areas in the north. That does not include Juneau at this point. So southeast, you must have a big storm sitting off the southeastern coast. Let's see if we can find it. Right now we've got leftovers of the most recent weather maker there still blowing cloud cover your way, but we don't really see that big storm just yet. That's because it's still off the screen. This is going to move northward very quickly, and you'll see this on the weather chart in a few moments, but I assure you it's a pretty impressive system that is wrapping up on itself and will continue to lower its atmospheric pressure as we go in the next couple of days. So you don't see what's coming to southeast just yet. It's just off the screen, but as you look further west, there are signs of previous activity wrapping around this overall weather maker here. We've got low pressure just south of the Alaska Peninsula, another low across the central chain, another wave that's sitting out across the northern Gulf, and again, leftovers across the eastern Gulf. So a whole lot going on, a lot of unsettled weather all the way around the Gulf and into the southern Bering. In the meantime, a look up north shows plenty of cloud cover working its way across the north slope, but a lot of this is working from south to north. That's warmer air working northward. On the back side of this is the colder air working its way into the Bering Sea, and some of this is helping to energize what's left across the central and eastern chain. Here's a look at the weather charts. Now keep your eye on the central and southern Gulf. That's where that stronger weather system is going to work its way northward and toward southeast. We have a 969 millibar low closer to southeast right now that's blowing kind of leftover rainfall in from the south and southeast. We have low pressure just offshore of Kodiak Island, another low south of Unimak Pass around 967 millibars, and another low a little bit further west at 972. We've got colder air working its way through the central and western interior. High pressure across the upper Tanana Valley at 993 millibars. Really not a huge high pressure system. And as we go ahead in time, you can see that really falls apart. The main ridge is still blocking out here across western Yukon and British Columbia. But here's that weather system as early as tonight. Overnight, you can see it working its way into the southern Gulf. This is going to swing its way northward, and already seeing rain showers across southeastern Alaska and periods of snow showers across the higher terrain. This will start to really deepen as we get into the overnight and early morning hours of tomorrow. Remember, those high wind watches and the winter storm watches, though, aren't until tomorrow night. So about 24 hours from now is what we're talking about. Across south central Alaska, periods of rain showers and snow showers for the higher terrain. Not so much in Cook Inlet. Most of that looks to be more clouds than anything else. And as we get north of the Alaska Range, you'll see hit and miss cloud cover across the upper Yukon Valley. Things look to be fairly dry and clear. Snow showers are possible across the north slope. A lot of that will be from the north and northwesterly winds working there along the Beaufort Seacoast, pushing some of that wetter weather ashore. However, one thing that's really going to change the weather here, probably in the next week or two, is the covering of the Arctic Ocean as the ice continues to increase fairly quickly in many cases. Once that happens, the weather is going to be a little bit different there, as you well know. So as we seal up the ocean, that precipitation is probably going to start to change a little bit. In the meantime, it is cold, it is blustery, it is snowy, and across the Bering Sea, snow showers continue for the central and western Aleutians tonight. High pressure is trying to work its way eastward into the western Bering. A look out west shows periods of rain and snow showers during the day tomorrow east of Adak and Atka. And once you get into Unalaska and Nikolsky, you're probably going to deal with a better chance of rain showers through most of the day, but that's going to be a really close call. Out across the western Alaska Range, periods of rain and snow showers there. And then here's our weather maker that we're watching for Wednesday night, down to 950 millibars. This is still working northward, but look, the front is leaving that core and stretching out around the northern and eastern Gulf. That's going to constrict the wind across the outer coast of southeastern Alaska. It's going to drive wet weather up into the higher terrain around northern parts of southeast, and because of that, again, there's that potential for snow, 6 to 12 inches west of the Chilkat River Bridge. Now, as we get into southern southeast, those high winds will probably come up in the later evening hours, and that means places from Sitka to Port Alexander, Craig, Klawock, Ketchikan, you're all going to be dealing with those stronger southeasterly gusts that could come up to about 60 miles per hour as you head into the evening and overnight hours. So again, that high wind watch will be posted for you as we get into tomorrow night. Here's a look at Thursday, and that core of that low pressure system is still out over the open waters of the Gulf. The wind will have diminished a little bit more in the afternoon. Warmer air will work back into northern parts of southeast. That means any really heavy snow will probably come back toward rain. And then across the outer coast, winds should let up a little bit more as we go through the day. There's still a potential for some gusty winds throughout the day. That probably won't quit. But you'll notice with the front gone, that focusing mechanism there to really steer some of the higher winds right into your coastal areas should diminish somewhat, probably not going away entirely. Now, if you're paying close attention, you'll notice there's another low pressure system right now across the western Kenai Peninsula. That's going to keep wind and rain coming into Prince William Sound and over the Kenai Peninsula itself. That will probably downslope out over the Anchorage area. So if you've got plans to move in here before Veterans Day at the end of the weekend, or end of the week, I should say, for places like Anchorage and the Matanuska and Susitna Valleys, at least the southern end of that, chances are there's going to be a lot of wind moving over the mountains. Not great for turbulence, but maybe not so great for precipitation either. So maybe not a whole lot to worry about around Anchorage as far as getting snowy or rainy in a tremendous way where most of the activity would take place. A look out west shows snow showers up and down the Bering Sea coast from St. Lawrence Island into the Pribilofs. Light snow possible around places like Ambler, maybe as far south as Norton Sound and into the Kuskokwim Delta region. And then for the central and western Aleutians, another band of snow develops there ahead of yet another wave of low pressure working out of the North Pacific. Meanwhile, high pressure is trying to drop southward across the north coast, 1,006 millibars there. So a whole lot of activity around the 49th state in the next 3 days. Here's a look at temperatures today. check that out. Ketchikan made it to 60 degrees this afternoon. 40s and 50s for just about everywhere else in southeast, including Juneau today, with a high temperature in the upper 40s. Prince William Sound in the 30s and 40s today. Valdez was 37, Anchorage around 35, 40 in Kenai, 14 in Fairbanks. It was 34 degrees around Eagle late this afternoon, 12 around Fort Yukon, 9 degrees for AKwx Pass, teens and 20s for a large portion of the North Slope, 24 in Barrow, 16 around Kaktovik and westward, lower 20s around Point Hope, Point Lay, Kivalina at 15, 22 in Nome. It was in the upper 20s to lower 30s around St. Lawrence Island. Norton Sound temperatures in the teens and 20s with Unalakleet at 23. Galena showed 11 degrees. McGrath was 15. Bethel had 20 degrees late this afternoon. Amonic was about 26. 20s and 30s around Bristol Bay. Lake Iliamna in the lower 30s with Kodiak Island in the upper 40s. 30s and 40s for a good chunk of the Alaska Peninsula. Sandpoint 45, 35 around St. Paul, 39 for Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, and upper 30s as you look westward toward the Aleutians and Shemya at 37. Overnight low temperatures will drop into the sub-zero range for Fort Yukon, Arctic Village, AKwx Pass. The North Slope in the single digits and low teens. Looks like Kotzebue at 9 degrees, Nome 15, South Central at or even above freezing by a bit. 42 around Kodiak, Sandpoint again 40 degrees, lower to mid 40s for southeast, and Prince William Sound in the mid to upper 30s. Highs tomorrow in the lower 20s around the middle Tanana Valley, North Pole and Fairbanks. Upper 30s and 40s for South Central, 47 in Kodiak, upper 40s to 50 degrees across parts of southeast coastal areas where it's windy, even warmer. The Alaska Peninsula back in the lower to mid 40s. Bristol Bay closer to 40 degrees north of the Kuskokwim Delta, teens and 20s. Unalakleet in the mid 20s tomorrow. Nome 25, St. Lawrence Island, upper 20s for you. Kotzebue Sound, teens and low 20s all the way out to Shishmaref, 20 in Barrow, and about 21 in Fairbanks with upper 20s to low 30s for the upper Tanana Valley. Here's a look at flying weather now. IFR conditions expected around the Brooks Range with MVFR north of that. Look for a band of IFR north and east of Nikolsky around the northern Gulf Coast and into parts of southeast, and MVFR elsewhere across southeastern Alaska with difficult flying conditions tomorrow. Look for a band of IFR stretching across the northern Gulf ahead of that front. So again, as the visibility drops, do expect to get into some stronger winds tomorrow. So watch out for that to develop. And around the Chugach Range, around Prince William Sound and the western Alaska Range, IFR will expand across the North Slope during the afternoon. So be careful if you're moving in and out of those northern passes. Here's a look at pass conditions. We expect IFR through most of the day in Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass across the western Alaska Range. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass turning over to IFR. Rainy Pass becomes IFR. Windy Pass holding at MVFR throughout the day. Isabel Pass will likely hold at MVFR throughout most of the day. Mentasta Pass will do the same. As you look at Tanita Pass, expect marginal conditions to develop, so improvement noted there. Portage Pass may linger at IFR through a good chunk of your Wednesday, and Chilkoot and White Pass, snow and IFR conditions expected there. Freezing levels show cold airs dropping southward across the west. The surface freezing line really not changing a whole lot from yesterday, but you can see a lot of warmth wrapping into that low pressure wave. So across south and western Alaska, freezing levels aloft up to 4,000 feet, but they are dropping across parts of southeast ahead of that low pressure system, the colder air being brought into that. Icing potential between 5,000 and 7,000 feet across most of the coastal areas in the Gulf. That should be light to isolated moderate for many locations, including Prince William Sound, Portage Pass, and parts of the western Alaska Range. A little bit further out west, that could be as low as 4,000 feet. The jet stream has several noticeable features here. Low pressures across the western Gulf with very fast-moving winds across the North Pacific and wrapping into the northern Gulf. This is one reason why we're watching the winds across southeastern Alaska. The dynamics high above in the atmosphere are driving some of the stronger winds at the surface, and when all those things kind of line up just right, you get a little extra oomph when that jet stream is sitting right on top of you, and that's what's going to happen tomorrow night and into Thursday with those really fast winds across the eastern Gulf and southeastern Alaska. The winds tomorrow around 150 knots over southeastern Alaska. Now for western and northern Alaska, those winds coming in from the south and west are helping to keep things warm. 65 to 95 knots over your head. And the storm conveyor belt coming in from the north and west over the Aleutians, that's allowing some of that colder air to make its way into the western Bering Sea for now at 9,000 feet. Here's low pressure driving in a lot of wind across the eastern Gulf, 45 to 60 knots there. and wrapping around northern and western areas in the Gulf. Northerlies coming across the Bering Sea between 20 and 40 knots, and you can see westerlies at 9,000 feet across the North Slope at 20 knots, with south and westerlies developing north of the Alaska Range for the central and eastern interior. At 3,000 feet, generally broad easterly flow working across the interior between 10 and 30 knots. Low pressure still in charge of the Gulf here at this level as well. Southeasterlies moving up the eastern Gulf, the northern Gulf looking at 50 to 55 knots, and over Bristol Bay, east and northeasterlies 20 to 30 knots, with northerlies in charge of the Bering at 20 to 40 knots, including the Pribilofs. Turbulence will be watching south and eastern Alaska. Again, by Wednesday night, there will likely be an expanded region of isolated severe across the southern outer coast below 4,000 feet. Most of southeastern Alaska will be getting increasingly worse turbulence as the afternoon goes on. Across the northern Gulf to Kodiak Island, watch for occasional moderate there, and also across the central Aleutians below 4,000 feet. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with an ice edge update and your marine weather here in just a few minutes.
Determination of true wind speed and direction is often difficult from a moving vessel. In this case, we're moving ahead at about 20 to 22 knots in this direction. The relative wind speed moving this way, as you can see by my hair and my shirt, blowing like this. Whereas in actuality, the true wind is coming from this direction and moving this way at about maybe 8 to 10 knots. This can be seen by the surface small breaking waves.
The most common and reliable way of estimating true wind speed and direction is by observing the wind's effect on the sea surface. These effects have been organized into a comparative scale called the Beaufort scale, recorded in knots. Ranging from calm, with the sea like a mirror, all the way up to hurricane force winds, the Beaufort scale associates sea conditions such as breaking waves, boiling sea, foam and spume with wind speed. A practiced observer will note such features as whitecaps or the formation of larger waves. The appearance of streaks and spray are important indicators of wind speed. Of course, wind waves always move in the direction the wind is blowing, so they indicate true wind direction. Your guide to sea state, wind, and clouds provides illustrations and descriptions of waves to help you apply the Beaufort scale. It's an approximate system, but can be quite accurate for an experienced observer. Once again, code your entry for wind direction. Wind speed is recorded directly in knots. Forecasters need to know present and past weather conditions, including cloud development. This is your appraisal of the conditions as you observed them during the past 6 hours. For example, conditions such as snow, or fog, or squalls, or other phenomena such as lightning or funnel clouds are coded as numbers as specified by the code card. The handbook gives the details on how to report the various kinds of weather phenomena and their subcategories. Clouds are a good predictor of changing weather. Proficiency in cloud identification is a combination of practice and study. There's a gradual transition between the various types of clouds, which can make identification difficult. The most reliable observations of clouds are made by keeping as close and continuous a watch as possible on their development. The National Weather Service posters and guide can be a great help in this. Cloud heights will have to be estimated. Sometimes objects near the horizon can offer perspective. Estimate the height above the sea at the base of the lowest cloud seen. Also, estimate the fraction of the sky covered by clouds of all types. This is a general observation and not of specific kinds of clouds. Visibility is always an estimate. The experienced observer learns to gauge visibility based on the appearance of the horizon. But where there are aids to navigation and other ships, the most precise measure of visibility is with the use of radar.
Two important parameters on the standard shipboard meteorological observation are waves and swell. Now, a swell is merely a wave that has outrun the wind. Now, off in this direction, we can see the swell moving in. It's characterized by that larger, smoother movement coming toward the ship about from 30 degrees off the port bow here. Whereas the locally induced wind waves, which are usually of smaller period and a choppier appearance, are superimposed on top of that swell. Now they are locally induced by the wind. In this case, the wind is coming from this direction. And you can see the crests of the little small wavelets breaking, coming in this direction.
Characterizing waves in swell can sometimes be difficult. Waves generated by a local and often changeable wind can be irregular in size and shape. Wind shifts can produce confused seas. Look for higher, better formed wind waves. Remember, wind waves are superimposed on the swell and can come from a different direction. Swell height is measured from trough to crest. Wind wave height is also measured from trough to crest, but not including the height of the swell. Wave period is the time between passing crests, measured in seconds. This and wave height, measured in half meters, are entered on the form. Swell comes from outside the local wind area and can come from more than one direction. The form asks for the direction, period, and height, as well as any secondary swell. Your wave and swell observations are important to forecasters. Ships and cargo are more easily damaged by large seas than by the wind.
On a container ship, it's the cargo, the boxes. We can lose containers over the side, damaged by weather and sea, and heavily damaged, and you want to avoid something like this.
Satellite images can show the overall extent of sea ice, but because of cloud cover, forecasters still require on-the-spot observations from ships or from shore to get a complete picture. If you sight ice flows when operating in high latitudes, consult the coding and descriptions contained in the observation handbook. More common is ice that accumulates on the ship. It occurs from ocean spray or combinations of spray, rain, and fog. Of course, all these phenomena are a function of air and sea temperature and dew point. Air temperature, sea temperature, and dew point are reported in Celsius, and it's critical that they be as accurate as possible.
Time for a quick check of the sea ice edge. Speaking of sea ice, and we are seeing more and more of that in the Beaufort Sea. The areas that have been sea ice free are becoming fewer and fewer, and it won't take a whole lot more to get a lot more ice across the Beaufort Sea coast. So areas in white are a little bit more of a solid concentration of the ice pack. And once we get into the blue shaded areas here, that's lower concentrations, below 80% coverage. You'll notice more areas of white along the northern coast, all the way down the Chukchi coast, and into the upper ends of the Kotzebue Sound region, certainly around Norton Sound. And if you were to look just a little bit further south, you'd start to see some slush piling up across the Kuskokwim Delta area there. And look for that to come and go in the coming days, but it is wintertime and it's only getting colder out there, so you know what direction that's probably going. Here's a look at southeastern Alaska. Remember, as we get into tomorrow night, winds are going to come up even more across the southern coastlines there for Ketchikan, Metlakatla, Craig, Klawock, all the way up to Sitka and Port Alexander. For the daytime hours, it looks like a stronger, steadier southeasterly flow will continue to work into the region with gustier winds developing as the afternoon goes on. 30 knots steady inside of the central and southern inner channels there with seas from 6 to 9 feet across the outer coast, higher gusts all the way up. 15 to 20 foot seas there with winds from 45 to 50 knots on Wednesday. As we get into Thursday, a little bit of a southerly shift across the southern outer coast. Winds will likely diminish a little bit more as we get into Thursday afternoon and evening, so some improvement noted there. Northerlies in the Lynn Canal at 20 knots, 30 to 40 knot winds from the southeast across the central and southern inner channels, and 6 to as high as 13 foot seas there down the Clarence Strait, with 25 foot seas across the outer coast for Thursday. Again, not a great day at sea. For south central, easterlies inside of Prince William Sound and winds across the north and western Gulf from 40 to 45 knots, 14 to 17 foot seas expected there with northeasterlies inside of Cook Inlet, 25 to as high as 35 knots west of the Barrens and into Shelikof Strait with 10 foot seas there west of the Barrens and into the strait itself. As we get into Thursday, northerlies continue down Cook Inlet. Look for 30-knot winds across some of the stronger areas there south of Callaghan Island. 7 to 8 foot seas expected as well. Easterlies inside of Prince William Sound, 25 knots with a 5-foot sea. South end easterlies a little bit further outside of Hitchinbrook Entrance. 40-knot winds continue with 22-foot seas, and north end easterly winds coming down the western Gulf at 25 to 30 knots for Thursday. For the Alaska Peninsula and inside Bristol Bay, northeasterlies 30 knots with a 5-foot sea. 40 knots there from Castle Cape to Chignik, and northerlies crossing the Alaska Peninsula at 30 to 35 with 10 to 12-foot seas on either side. For Thursday, the northeasterlies continue inside of Bristol Bay with a 20-knot wind and 5-foot seas, 15-foot seas there from Castle Cape to Chignik, becoming 13 feet as you move down the coast. And northerlies continue across the Bering Sea coast of the peninsula, 30 knots with a 13-foot sea on Thursday. For the Aleutians, northerlies are in charge with winds around 20 knots in the west, but as strong as 40 to 45 for the central and eastern chain, 13 to 19-foot seas for the Pacific coast, and 16 to as high as 22-foot seas there for the central and eastern chain. By Thursday, an easterly shift responding to the next wave coming up out of the northern Pacific, 11 to 12-foot seas there. Winds come up to 45 knots from Kiska to Attu. Across the Bering Sea coast, 20 to 30 knots from the north, and across the Pacific coast, a shift to a northwesterly direction, 30 to 35, 12 to 13-foot seas expected there on Thursday. For the west, driving north winds at 30 to 35, 8 to 11-foot seas, 13 around the Pribilofs, 35 knots. Freezing spray a possibility in the northern Bering, and watch for that again on Thursday. Expect that some areas across the north will continue to see 8-foot seas there with freezing spray. Now, as we, looks like we have had a graphical malfunction there, so we'll just wrap up here for the rest of the show, but I'll recap the wind watches there for southeastern Alaska. A high wind watch posted for the southern outer coast and the inner channels that begins Wednesday night and into Thursday. And what that means is winds could come up from the south and east, gusting to 60 miles per hour there, steady from the southeast, 25 to 40. That's tomorrow night. A little bit further up the northern side of southeast, you're watching for winter weather. And from the Chilkat Bridge and westward, we're expecting the possibility of 6 to 12 inches of snow by the afternoon on Thursday. That could swing back toward rain. So prepare in southeast. Going to be a blustery couple days, and you can find all these graphics online at weather.gov. Have a good night. See you tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, sustaining Alaska's pipeline and its operations today and into the future.